So it seems that the Dark Gods are pleased and Chaos Space Marines are in ascendancy. Let's take a look at the army list that was used to win 10th edition's biggest tournament so far, in the name of the Ruinous Powers. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Chaos Space Marines, and in this video I thought it could be interesting to take a look at the list of Liam VSL, who used his Chaos Space Marines to take down the London Grand Tournament, seemingly holding his own very well against an endless wave of Eldari. In the video we'll talk through the army and go through the units one by one, talking about roughly what they do in game, and getting a quick look at an Apex Chaos Space Marines list and a few of the options it can use. In 10th edition 40k at the moment, Chaos Space Marines are doing at least fairly well. Before the big balance update, they were at around about 50% win percentage. Definitely not too bad performance in the face of pre-nerf Eldari and Genestealer cults. Definitely towards the top of the pack already, though they did seem to come through the balance data slate surprisingly well. A few nerfs to some choice units like Abaddon, Obliterators and Forge Fiends going up a little bit, but a fair few things going down, such as Chosen and Warp Talons among many others. And a lot of people did have them pinned to be one of the better armies going through after the data slate. Chaos do seem to have been delivering that, and absolutely seem to be showing time and again that they can compete at the very top levels. They've got an overall tournament win rate of around about 54% at the moment, and between that and their event wins, there's a good argument that they're one of the next top factions after the still dominant Eldari, which still tend to be winning a fair bunch more. Chaos Space Marines definitely seem to have done fairly well at the LGT anyway, both winning the event and also being one of the other 4 semi-final lists as well, along with another Eldari player. Taking a look at the list, this is a 2000 points Chaos Space Marines army run by Liam VSL, certainly a well-known name on the 40k tournament scene, and no stranger to podium places. It almost goes without saying that if you're winning a tournament of this enormous sort of size with a huge 740 players in it, you both have an optimal list and are playing it pretty perfectly, as you're absolutely guaranteed to run into other players doing the same. Let's go through the list unit by unit and roughly what they can do. Obviously I'm not the person who wrote or played this, so there's every chance I might be missing subtleties, but at least a fair few of the units seem at least fairly obvious in what they're trying to do in game. First up, there seems to be a core of the army with 3 Chaos Lords heading up a whole bunch of Chosen and Rhinos. This seems to be a pretty common combo, as the Chosen can get a lot out of a Chaos Lord with the free stratagems, plus they're just generally all around strong beat sticks. The Lords here take Plasma Pistols and Demon Hammers for a seriously fighty character with damage 3 weapons for a turn, and then there's 3 units of Chosen, 1 of 10 and 2 of 5, they're all undivided as well. They take Maximal Power Fists, Combi Weapons and Plasma Pistols plus an Icon, and they're all riding in 2 Rhinos. I'd guess that 2 of the squads go in one of the Rhinos and the big one goes in the other, each with a Lord attached. The Rhinos are Nurgle marked, I'd guess perhaps to allow the stratagem to allow them to hide. Chosen were perhaps one of the surprise winners out of the balance update. They went down from 115 points per 5 to 110, and I thought they were already very good at 115. They're perhaps just surprisingly cheap for their defensive profiles, not having any invulnerable save, but having 3 wounds rather than the standard Space Marine 2. And coming with a fair bit of exciting gear just included at base. Their standard ones get accursed weapons with 5 attacks at strength 5 and AP 2. 1 per 5 gets a Power Fist with 4 attacks at strength 8 and damage 2 for punching up a bit, and then a few can take combi weapons and plasma pistols for a little bit more ranged threat. They're pretty flexible with a really long threat range, with their Chosen Marauder special rule as well. They get built-in advanced shoot and charge, so it means that they can go a seriously long way out of the Rhinos if it makes sense. The icons also make them pretty reliable for dark packs as well, less likely to fail it to take the mortal wounds. The undivided mark means that if you do a dark patch you get to reroll hit rolls of 1 as well. That's helpful at range and melee. The Chaos Lords leading up these guys are fairly cheap at 75 points, a nice fighty character with 5 wounds and a 4+ invulnerable save. They're just generally fighty characters with those Demon Hammers with the devastating wounds. Once per battle they can go into Rage mode and increase the strength attacks and AP and damage characteristic of its melee weapons all by 1. That's just enormously threatening attacks with strength 9, AP 3 and damage 3. And like Space Marine captains, they can make 1 stratagem free per turn that's a battle tactic. Probably the best one for that is Profane Zeal, the one that's great with Undivided. It allows you just to re-roll all hit rolls and all wound rolls, so getting that for free is massive, particularly on a turn when the Lord turns on his Rage mode with the Demon Hammer. It means that these fairly cheap little units can just have spectacular damage, and if none of them happen to use Profane Zeal in your own turn, then you could potentially turn on the worsening enemy AP by 1 for Infernal Rites. That's another good defensive tactic to flex to. Then there's 2 units of 5 Warp Talons with the Slanesh mark. Fast-moving Demonkin with lightning claws, and I'm really not surprised to see these guys being used in competitive lists quite a lot now. They were perhaps the single biggest winner of the points changes, going down by a massive amount. Warp Talons are just nice fast-moving jump infantry, quite general-purpose melee with strength 5 and re-rolling wound rolls with twin links. They could be potentially used as a deep strike threat with rapid ingress maybe, though I'd say they just seem like quite a nice unit to just skirmish up the board, jumping from terrain to terrain and advancing if needed. They march with a Slanesh mark, which helps them out quite a lot. They get sustained hits on a 5+ when they use a Dark Pact for that, and it allows them to advance and charge for a 1 CP with unnatural swiftness if needed. If they activate that one, they've got an average charge threat range of over 22 inches. They can make enemy units have to test Desperate Escape if they want to fall back from combat as well. That can be quite disruptive in the right situation. Then there's some classic Chaos Space Marine heavy firepower that seem to be very near auto-include status in lists, 2 units of 2 Obliterators with both Undivided and Nurgle, and then 2 Forge Fiends with triple Ectoplasma Cannon, again 1 Undivided and 1 Nurgle here as well. Forge Fiends were kind of auto-include before, and it still seems they haven't really gone anywhere with that despite their points going up quite significantly to 180. A fairly standard Demon Engine profile with 12 wounds and an invul save, and in general the popular gun tends to be the Ectoplasma Cannon, D3 shots apiece with strength 10, AP 3 and damage 3, excellent for killing Terminators and elite infantry. They've all got the blast keyword, so if you target something like a big massed up unit of Necron warriors or something, you're getting way more hits. And if it makes sense to, you can overcharge the cannons to take hazardous hits for devastating wounds. Could be nice to blast through Terminator invulnerable saves or hard targets. With these firepower units, marking some of them with Nurgle and Undivided seems quite common. Undivided could allow you to threaten the big reroll stratagem if it made sense for some reason to try and fish for those devastating wounds. Nurgle's really interesting as well though, getting you sustained hits on a 5+ at range. Really very nice when you get a Dark Pact there, and it means that if you use the Dark Obscuration stratagem on them, then you can't be targeted outside of 12 inches. Really quite disruptive if the opponent really wants to try and delete the Nurgle Forge Fiend with gunline units if it's all they can shoot. If it makes sense, you can just turn off enemy shooting and have a gun turret that they can't really touch, maybe holding down a home field objective at the same time perhaps. Then there's 2 units of 2 Obliterators. I've seen lots of lists that run squads of 4 of these, but just smaller squads of these guys this time. They're just overall a strong deep strike damage threat, firepower that's going to be effective no matter what target you point at, from 1 wound infantry to standard space marines to heavy tanks and vehicles, and coming out of deep strike they're going to get the jump on the enemy, not the other way around. Their big warp rift attack once per game can be quite nice as well for indirect fire for a turn. It is definitely going to cut their damage output a bit, taking the indirect penalties, but if you can light up an enemy unit that was holding a critical objective, or potentially light up some very fragile but very powerful enemy units, maybe some Eldar Aspect warriors or something, then it could be a really big power play. Again, like the Forge Fiends, the Undivided and Nurgle marks both can have good effects each of their own. Then to round off the list, there's a whole bunch of objective support, 10 cultists, 3 Nurglings, the Blue Scribes, and also Celeste from the Allied Demons portion. The cultists take firearms and their various special weapons that they get. They're Nurgle marked, and they're just some chaff infantry that have the sticky objectives type rule. Could be quite nice to start on your home field objective, which means it's yours until your opponent takes it, even if things get killed off it. For the 35 points that they are, Nurglings seem borderline auto-include for Chaos Space Marine lists that can take them. They come both with Infiltrate and Deep Strike, so are pretty great for doing things like secondary objectives. They could just pop up to do things like either behind enemy lines, or scoring objectives in the corners, or engage on all fronts or something. Or if it made sense that you desperately needed to screen out part of the midfield pre-game, then they could infiltrate instead. The Blue Scribes are just very cheap lone operatives at just 65 points. They don't really do much, but they just move quite fast and they can take objectives if there's nothing to contest them. They can also deep strike for secondary objectives as well. Could be quite nice units to come down maybe either in the enemy backfield if they can't screen them, and force the opponents to go and have to try and deal with them if they don't want them just being a nuisance. Finally, Celeste is the Names Demon Prince Vengeful Allegiance pair, the one that's got a Demon Prince of Slanesh plus a Demonette Herald. These guys I think definitely rank amongst some of the strongest Chaos Demon datasheets that you can take at the moment, and I'd argue that they don't really lose a whole load not being in the Chaos Demon detachment. A fairly good pick for armies that can take them just for strength alone. They're basically really great at clearing out enemy infantry. They've got a lot of attacks at either within 12 or 9 inches that are good at clearing out 1 wound infantry, a little bit of AP in either strength 6 or strength 4. And then when they get into combat, they've got more strength 4 AP 1 attacks, backed up by the Demon Prince himself with 6 attacks at strength 7 and damage 3. Overall, between everything, they do just a fair amount of damage just between their range and their melee attacks. The Cacophonic Choir Psychic attack is really quite nasty with those devastating wounds too. And perhaps the most annoying thing about them is that you have to chew through 9 wounds with a 4+ invulnerable save to kill them the first time, at which point they promptly try to get up again and rise from the dead, getting up on a 2+ with delightful agonies once per game. It means that, say, if your opponent could only kill them with range or only kill them in melee, they're basically almost guaranteed to rise again to take the fight to the enemy one more time. Overall, they're just not too bad in terms of both damage and defense, and they're even at least fairly fast with a 9-inch move. Could just foot slog up the board, though I feel like they could be quite nice units to drop down with rapid ingress maybe. Getting a full turn of that close range shooting followed up by melee could certainly clear out a bunch of enemies. Overall, lots of really cool stuff there. Just by winning the LGT, you can go without saying that it can hold its own against the very strongest stuff in the meta at the moment, and it seems that the list might be particularly good against Eldari. I noticed that the last 3 games of the tournament were all against Eldar. I feel like maybe having some units with just really long threat ranges like the Warp Talons could help out against them. Plus doing some shenanigans like making some things untargetable at range, or having things like Obliterators fire out of line of sight to kill some Aspect Warriors or something could be fun. Otherwise, it seems that the path to victory was playing Space Marines in the first round, then Chaos Space Marines, Deathwatch, Tau and Grey Knights. Definitely a pretty solid path to victory before taking down the strongest army in 40k 3 times in a row. If you're interested, here was the Eldari list that was beaten in the final. Honestly, nothing to diminish the achievement of coming second in a tournament of 740 people. That's ridiculously impressive in itself. This one was commanded to 8 victories before coming on stock against the Chaos Space Marines by Hugo Ricciardi. A pretty crazy character-heavy Eldari list this one, an expensive Autarch Wayleaper for CP and doing lone operative things, resurrecting himself with a Phoenix gem, a Farseer who could maybe help out Night Spinners or Wraithguard with devastating wounds, Fugan and his absolutely enormous Melter Shot, the blitzing Solidaire that can zoom himself an enormous way across the board, a Spirit Seer leading up a massive unit of 10 Wraithguard with Wraith Cannons. Fate's Messenger allows you some dice manipulation and can add some massive strength to the unit as well. 2 Night Spinners and their scary ignores line of sight firepower, a bunch of fairly god tier secondary objective doers in the Swooping Hawks and the Warp Spiders, very scary firepower to clear out enemy infantry at close range as well. And of course the terrifying threat of the Incarn, jumping over the board when units die and just being massively strong on its raw stats alone beyond that. Quite an interesting and character heavy list. I definitely feel like that's the sort of list that I wouldn't have the first clue about how to play right. Lots of character tricks, lone operatives, and just a couple of really big strong units in the Incarn and the Wraithguard. Everything else is very hide around corners and don't get shot while taking apart the enemy piece by piece. In any case, pretty cool to see Chaos Space Marines on top of the 40k's biggest tournament. Let me know what you think of the army list down in the comments below. And of course, as always, any other insights as to how it was played or any interesting things are always appreciated. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.